So Plato said that necessity is the mother of invention.
If necessity is the mother, then the father is Kiwi ingenuity. We all know that.
Yeah, Kiwi ingenuity. That good old feeling that Luke talked about this morning, the guy in the shed tinkering away, making solutions to problems no one knew they had out of only their smarts and a little bit of No.8 Wire.
We love it so much in this country that we've given it a name. We've called it the No.8 Wire mentality.
Yes.
And 200 or so years of New Zealand history have infused this spirit into our culture.
We love it so much that John and I wrote a book about it, to be released soon. And we wanted to set out and show the world and New Zealand how New Zealand is the most innovative, the most inventive country on the planet. That's worth a clap, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much.
But imagine our horror when we found out we were actually wrong. New Zealand is nowhere near the most inventive country in the world. In fact, we're well down the list.
Correct. Not only is our No.8 Wire mentality not helping us get forward anymore, it's actually holding us back. Ooh. So in the next 14 minutes, with 14 stories of Kiwi invention, we're going to show you why and what we can do about it.
So to start us off, what's at the heart and the root of our No.8 Wire mentality? Well, it's distance. Distance creates isolation, creates necessity. Let's take this TED talk back about 800 years. When the first Polynesian explorers found New Zealand, the last major landmass in the world to be discovered, the first thing, naturally enough, that they had on their minds was food.
It's been a long canoe ride. They were sick of eating fish, basically.
And there on the horizon,
Yes.
they were very happy to see our only native palm tree. Does anyone know what our only native palm tree is called?
Oh, I do. The Nico.
Correct, the Nico. And do you know what Nico means, anybody?
I do.
What's
no coconuts.
No coconuts.
Ouch.
So the very name of the palm tree recorded our first settlers' intense disappointment with their new country. In much the same way today, later on, Poverty Bay.
Doubtful sound.
Hamilton. Disappointing.
No.
You may laugh, but the early Maori did not.
Yes.
It was quite serious.
Yes. They'd been paddling for 2,500 kilometres. They needed food. They had necessity. They needed something. They had with them the kumara.
Unfortunately, the kumara needs to grow, warm soil to grow, and it can only grow in a very small part of the country. But luckily, the early Maori were very, very inventive, and they mixed small stones in with the soil. The stones soaked up the sun's rays during the day, and at the night they dispersed them, basically turning a temperate soil into a tropical soil. Amazing invention. Scientists today call it lithic agronomy.
So this tyranny of distance that we talk about actually sometimes creates the opportunity for independence, for invention and inventive thinking. The early settlers to New Zealand were all like this. They had this frontier they had to conquer. They had a frontier mentality. They were a long way from help. They were a long way just from the shops.
They had to think outside the box because the box was literally thousands of miles away.
Yes. And speaking of thinking outside the box,
We also invented the chicken.
some of these facts might not all be true. We didn't actually invent the chicken, but here's a great example of how isolation and distance created a new set of thinking. Robert Ellis in Brightwater near Nelson in 1910 had necessity.
Robert Ellis was given the job of turning on the town's brand new street lamps on and off every day. A pretty boring task, turning these lights on and off every night, every morning. So he invented a solution to make it easier.
And his idea was to simply use the chickens. He'd noticed that every night the chickens came in to roost, and in the morning when it got light, they went back out again. So he wired up the town's 6 electricity devices to the stick that they roosted on, off. Genius. Different way of thinking.
And to this day, the electricity and the lights of every major city in the world are still controlled in that way.
Correct. Look, we could tell you lots of different stories. We could tell you about John Hartstone, who invented the milk meter out of an old lemonade bottle and some parts from the local plumber, and he created the company True Test as a result, propelling New Zealand into being one of the world leaders in the dairy industry.
What about William Gallagher, who wired up his car to an electric current to stop his horse from rubbing himself against the car? And in doing so, actually came up with the idea to invent the electric fence.
Yes. Or more recently, young Isla Hutchinson. Isla's invented a way to make kindling chopping more safe. So she's worked out if you keep the blade bit still and move the wood, it's a lot safer. Different way of thinking.
So distance creates necessity, creates a different way of thinking. But there's another element to our number 8 wire mentality, and that is challenging authority.
Yes.
We like to challenge the status quo. We're rebels. Basically, we're badass.
William Bernard Hudson in 1894 rocked up to the Wellington Philosophical Society. They were the authorities at the time, and he said to them, I've got an idea. How about at the beginning of every summer, we change the clocks so that the working class people get more time in the sunshine after work?
Top idea, George, top idea. So from now on, all our clocks will have to have 2 sets of hands. Top idea, George.
No, I did this.
Well, top idea. Good. Even thinking, George. Imagine if there's more sunlight, how that's going to fade the curtains. You idiot, you buffoon.
And that's pretty much the reaction he got. But he didn't give up there. He decided to challenge the authorities. He went back to Christchurch. He told all his friends about it. He wrote papers. He thought up great arguments, and he went back there 5 years later to the Wellington Philosophical Society, and he convinced them that daylight savings time was a great idea. First in the world to think of it.
Another example. Ken Drew and Les Porter in the early 1970s challenged the orthodoxy when they became the first people in the world to domesticate the deer. It was the first large animal to be domesticated by humankind in 5,000 years.
Colin Murdoch challenged medical authority when he invented the plastic syringe. The authorities at the time said, look, Colin, no one's ever going to want plastic stuff near their skin or in their bodies. Crazy idea. But he ignored them, and today plastic syringes are used in their millions around the world.
Now, this independent thinking, this lack of respect for authority can actually be measured. There you can see on the x-axis is what we call the power-distance ratio, basically how readily an individual will accept authority.
On the y-axis, the vertical axis, is this theory of independence. How much people want to do it by themselves. I don't need help, I'm okay by myself. So the combination of the two has New Zealanders as a bunch of people who are very independently minded, who challenge authority and go it alone.
Bugger the boxing. Pour the concrete.
Yes.
Measure once, cut twice.
She'll be right, mate.
Good enough is good enough.
That's the number 8 wire spirit right there.
Necessity
Plus thinking differently.
plus challenging authority.
This makes up our number 8 wire spirit. But there's a problem.
It's simply put, not enough. And it hasn't been for quite a long time. The number 8 wire mentality is great for getting things started, but it's not great for seeing things through and getting real value out of our ideas.
Colin Murdoch actually invented the plastic syringe, but he never made any money out of it, and neither did New Zealand. Other people stole his idea because he couldn't afford to patent it everywhere he needed to.
George Vernon Hudson invented daylight savings, but New Zealand was very slow to adopt it. In fact, the first to the punch were Germany in World War I. We were about the 35th country, and not till 1927.
So this number 8 wire spirit really can act against us. Take, for example, number 8 wire itself. There it is, in action.
Right.
Real solution on the farm. It's a real classic number 8 wire approach, that one right there.
There's only 2 problems with this, David.
Yes.
Firstly, number 8 wire is more properly called British Industrial Standard Wire Gauge number 8.
Oh.
It's English. Comes from England, always has.
Oh. So our very metaphor for invention and ingenuity is imported.
Yeah.
But no, forget about that.
Yeah.
Forget about that.
Don't worry.
Look at the thing itself. It's a thing of beauty. It's a real solution on the farm. It's a crazy, creative, challenging, authority, thinking differently approach. Bits of wood, bits of number 8 wire strung together to make what we call the Taranaki gate.
Brilliant.
Yes.
There's only one problem with that.
Hello?
If you go to Dorset, it's called the Dorset Gate.
If you go to the Channel Islands, it's called the Channel Islands gate.
If you go to Coolangatta, it's called a gate, mate.
Anyway, let's have another story about how we need to rethink and how we're missing out on opportunity. John Eustace in 1884 in Dunedin, he was a tinsmith, and he invented a new way to close tins.
There it is there. It was the first time in the world that a tin could be closed and make it airtight, watertight, and vermin-free. It was a real world breakthrough, and it remains to this day the best way to close a tin lid. But what happened to John Eustace?
Well, he did patent the idea, but only here in New Zealand. And it got really popular. Lots of people wanted it because it was so good. He sent off to get some more made in the UK. Unfortunately, his tin lid started coming back, but so did competitors' products with a stolen design. He hadn't painted it over there.
He was naive, and his naivety meant that he lost out. In fact, we all lost out. Nowadays, things are probably different though, right?
Oh, that was the old days, surely.
Modern country, we're very inventive. We probably patent more patents than your average country.
No. Actually, as you'll see here, while we do have a lot of patents here in New Zealand, protecting it from ourselves basically, in a very important area of triadic patents, patents registered in the US, in Europe and in Japan, the reality is we're very far behind.
There we are. You can see Denmark there on about 25 patents per million people per year, and there's New Zealand on 3.
When we miss out on capturing the value of our ideas, we all miss out.
Time for another invention.
Yes. All right. Of course, you all recognise expanded polytetrafluoroethylene.
Okay.
But there might be a couple of people in the front who are not aware of the story, so we'll tell it. This is the chemical compound now popularly known as Gore-Tex. But it wasn't always called Gore-Tex, was it, John?
No, in fact, there was a time when it could have been going to be called Cropper-Tex, because there was a New Zealander called John Cropper who first came up with a way of manufacturing this. He invented a machine to make a breathable and waterproof tape, and he began to manufacture this.
But he kept it a secret. He was a bit naive. He didn't know you could patent the process for making something. So he made these machines and he sent them off overseas and he basically said, shh, don't tell anyone how they work. And unfortunately, and it's well understood and documented, 2 years later than that, the same process was invented and patented by Robert Gore of the USA.
Hang on there, Kiwi. You're infringing our patent.
Yeah, but I invented it first.
It didn't matter. The fight went all the way to the US Supreme Court to find out who had the right to make what is now called Gore-Tex. And you probably guess from the name who won.
Today, the Gore-Tex company is worth $3.5 billion. That's what we all missed out on. Not only Mr. Cropper, the whole of New Zealand. If they were a New Zealand company, they'd be in our top exporters.
So our very act of challenging authority, of going it alone, actually isolates us from the help and advice we need to make proper value and get proper protection of our ideas. Our No.8 Wire mentality is actually working against us.
But does that translate itself into real money? Well, we think it does. It's hitting us in the pocket.
Here you can see how New Zealand's GDP in the early 1970s was on a par with other countries like Finland, Denmark and Australia. But fast forward to today and you can see that we're about $15,000 per person per year poorer than those other countries.
Ouch. So what's Denmark doing differently that accounts for all these patents and the higher GDP? To answer that question, let's look at another New Zealand invention to show how a Kiwi leader is taking this a new approach and rewiring our No.8 Wire mentality.
Yeah, here's a crowd who's really showing us how to rewire that No.8 Wire mentality.
If you lie awake at night listening to your partner snoring and you can't get to sleep, there's 2 ways you can deal with it. You can elbow them and hope they stop and turn over, or you can blow warm, moist air up their nose. We've all tried it.
And that's what this invention does. As you can see, it's straight out of the shed. The prototype here is just made of an old AG jar, some holes drilled in the lid, and this is just a typical No.8 Wire solution.
Yeah, but it doesn't end there because the company that made it, New Zealand company Fisher & Paykel Healthcare, carried on. They got better and better at making them. They invested in R&D. They created better versions of the product. They protected their IP. They built up this. They become the world leader in this niche of sleep apnea prevention products. They captured the value of their ideas.
So what's the measurable difference about Fisher & Paykel that we can learn from? They invest heavily in R&D. In fact, they invest about 8% of their operating revenue in R&D. That's about $50 million per year.
8% of their operating revenue. How does that compare with the New Zealand average, do you think?
It's about 8 times the New Zealand average. You can see New Zealand's average there is about just over 1%. So that $50 million that Fisher & Paykel spend every year would make up about 10% of our entire manufacturing sector's spend on R&D.
Ouch. But again, do you think it matters? Do you think R&D investment matters? Well, let's compare again with our old nemesis, Denmark. Similar sort of country to us. Clearly a world leader in Lego design, but apart from that, Danske Møbler, maybe.
Very much.
They spend 3 times what we do in R&D, making different types of Lego. I don't know. Does that translate itself into real value?
Well, it does, and you can see the similar shape of the curve. As their R&D spend increases, so has their relative wealth.
Of course, there's lots of factors at play here. We're not mistaking correlation with causation, but the reality is that a very similar country to New Zealand has got a vastly different outcome, and their way of going around innovation and R&D is a big part of why.
So, we think one of the major reasons that we don't invest in R&D as we should is because we don't think we have to. After all, we're the No.8 Wire country, right?
Exactly. But Fisher & Paykel Healthcare have done by marrying together this great inventive No.8 Wire spirit with new No.8 Wire of thinking. So R&D investment is the first step in rewiring. The second step, commercialization, taking deep, deep science and turning it into products and real-world solutions.
Nothing could be deeper as far as science goes than superconductors. And who would have thought that New Zealand would be at the world forefront of superconductor technology?
So superconductors, that normal wires lose 8% of their power in transmission. Superconductors could save all of that power. The challenge is how to get the superconductors working at a high enough temperature and in a format that's actually useful.
And New Zealand scientists Jeff Talon and Bob Buckley have risen to this challenge, and they've become the first people in the world to make practical superconductors.
Not only did they work out how to make a high-temperature superconductor in a wire format, they worked out how to make real-world products and solutions out of it. Real applications in medical healthcare, motor design, power transmission.
They've commercialized that technology. That's the second step of rewiring. The third step, collaboration. Step out of the shed. Shake off your mistrust of other people and collaborate with other people around the world.
That's right. As an example, we've all heard and seen how the wireless revolution has changed the world. First, wireless communication, then wireless data. The next big thing, wireless power.
Auckland company Power by Proxy are leading the world for wireless power, and they're doing it with collaboration. First of all, they collaborated with John Boys and Grant Kovic of Auckland University, who have a world-leading portfolio of IP in the area of wireless power. And secondly, Power by Proxy are collaborating with financial, business and commercial interests around the globe. And that has really paid off for them. They're at the very world forefront of this technology.
So Fisher & Paykel Healthcare, superconductors, Power by Proxy. Lots of research, development, rich IP, bringing in smart capital, collaborating with others, working with each other, showing each other how to lead the way and protect their IP.
We've gone from No.8 Wire to superconducting wires of the future, all the way to no wires at all.
Look, No.8 Wire thinking has been great for New Zealand. It's served us really, really well. But it's no longer sufficient to take us forward. We need to add in investment in R&D.
Commercialization of science.
And genuine collaboration.
And if we can do this again and again and again, then once more New Zealand can lead the way in world innovation.
And that's No.8 Re-wired. Thanks very much.
Thank you.